The billionaire's son was not like other children. From the moment he was born, everyone around him knew he was special, but not in the way most people might think. He was strong-willed, stubborn, and full of energy that seemed impossible to control. His family had every comfort a child could dream of: luxury cars, the biggest toys, private tutors, and teachers who were considered the best in the world, but none of it seemed to matter to him. Nothing worked. No one could make him listen, no one could teach him discipline, and no one could reach his heart. People would try, day after day, week after week, but eventually, they all gave up. They didn't understand him. They didn't know what to do. Even the most patient and experienced teachers found themselves at their limits. The boy had grown used to people trying and failing. He watched them struggle and eventually leave, and somehow, it gave him a strange sense of power. He began to test every adult he met, pushing boundaries, breaking rules, and acting as if nothing and no one could influence him. He was clever, mischievous, and sometimes cruel, though he didn't mean to be. It was as if he was challenging the world itself, daring anyone to try and guide him. His father, one of the wealthiest men in the country, had tried everything. He had hired the finest mentors, educators, and coaches, each one carefully selected after long interviews and recommendations. They all came with impressive resumes, glowing references, and promises that they could handle the boy. But within weeks, or even days, they would leave, frustrated, exhausted, or sometimes defeated. It was becoming a family problem, a question that no money or influence could solve. The father didn't just want someone to teach his son academic skills. He wanted someone who could guide him, someone who could shape his character, someone who could teach him respect, discipline, and how to make the right choices in life. But every adult who tried fell short. Some yelled, some bribed, some punished, and some simply walked away. No method worked. The boy seemed untouchable, and the father's hope was slowly slipping away. He began to wonder if maybe the problem wasn't the teachers, it was the boy. Perhaps he was just too difficult, too wild, or too set in his ways to ever change. At school, it was the same story. Teachers complained about his behavior. Classmates were afraid of him because he was unpredictable. Sometimes he would show brilliance beyond his age, understanding complex ideas effortlessly, and other times he would refuse to do even the simplest tasks. He lived in a world of contradictions, smart but rebellious, strong but careless, charming but frustrating. Everyone who encountered him left with a story of how impossible he was to manage. But even in all this chaos, there was something about him that hinted at potential. Beneath the defiance and stubbornness, there was a spark, a kind of energy that could be powerful if it were guided correctly. The problem was, no one had figured out how to guide it. The boy's father knew that if someone could reach him, if someone could truly understand him, he could become not just well-behaved but extraordinary. But finding that person seemed impossible. The home itself felt tense. Staff whispered about him in fear, tutors dreaded their sessions, and family gatherings were often filled with stress. Everyone tiptoed around him, careful not to upset him, careful not to trigger a tantrum or rebellion. And yet, the boy seemed completely unaware of the worry he caused. To him, it was all a game, a test of who could stand up to him and who would break first. Many adults had broken. Many had given up. That's why the challenge was so unique. It wasn't just that he was difficult. It was that he had learned to push people away, to test limits, and to make them feel powerless. This was the situation when the story begins. The billionaire's son remained a mystery, unsolved and untamed. No one could lead him, no one could control him, and no one could earn his trust. And yet, somewhere beyond the walls of privilege, beyond the riches and tutors, there was someone who might be able to do the impossible. Someone who came from a completely different life, someone who had nothing to offer except understanding, patience, and courage. At that moment, no one knew who that person would be, but it was clear that the challenge had only just begun. The boy's story was waiting for the right person to step into his life, someone who could see beyond his stubbornness and recognize the potential that no one else could. Until that person arrived, the billionaire's son would remain the most impossible child anyone had ever tried to guide. Life has a way of surprising people when they least expect it. Just when it seemed like the billionaire's son was impossible to reach, someone appeared from a world completely different from his own. This wasn't a tutor, a mentor, or a person with a fancy title. This was a poor black boy from a neighborhood where life was hard, and opportunities were few. He had grown up with struggles most people couldn't even imagine. His shoes were often worn, his clothes patched, and his days filled with responsibilities beyond his age. Yet, somehow, he carried a quiet strength, a spark that refused to be dimmed by circumstance. Their first encounter was accidental. The billionaire's son had been outside, roaming the gardens of his enormous mansion, when the poor boy appeared delivering groceries for a local charity event. They were from completely different worlds, one surrounded by wealth and comfort, the other by challenges and scarcity. Most people would have seen the boy and ignored him. But something in his eyes, a mixture of courage and calmness, caught the billionaire's son off guard. It was not fear, it was not arrogance, it was confidence, but the kind that didn't demand attention, the kind that quietly said, "I can handle myself." At first, the encounter was awkward. The billionaire's son, used to being the center of attention, tested him immediately. He said harsh words, made fun of the boy's clothes, even tried to scare him. Most children would have cowered or run away. Most adults would have reacted with anger or scolding. But this boy didn't flinch. Instead, he smiled gently, looked the son in the eyes, and responded calmly. His words were simple but careful, as if he knew exactly how to speak to someone who was used to breaking others. Curiosity began to take root. The billionaire's son, who had always resisted guidance, found himself intrigued. He had never met anyone who could stand up to him without fear or anger. He wanted to test this boy, to see if he would break like everyone else. And the boy, without realizing it, had already accepted the challenge. He didn't come to compete, he didn't come to fight. He came to understand. Over the next few days, small interactions turned into longer conversations. The poor boy asked questions, not to interrogate, but to understand. "Why do you do this?" he asked once, calmly, after the son had thrown a tantrum in frustration. The billionaire's son froze. No one had ever asked him that before. Most adults yelled, punished, or tried to force him into obedience. This boy simply asked a question, with genuine interest, and it made the son pause. It wasn't magic. It wasn't instant change. But it was the beginning. The poor boy didn't rely on rules, money, or authority to influence him. Instead, he listened. He observed. He noticed the small things, the way the son clenched his fists when frustrated, the way his eyes darted around when he was nervous, the rare moments when he actually smiled for no reason. And slowly, without the son realizing it, trust started to grow. Not trust born of fear or expectation, but trust born of curiosity and understanding. Meanwhile, the billionaire's father watched cautiously. He had seen countless people fail, and he was skeptical. How could a boy from a struggling neighborhood, with no experience or title, possibly guide his son? Yet, he could see something different in the interactions. There was a subtle shift, laughter where there hadn't been any, calm where there had been chaos. The father didn't fully understand it, but he could sense that something extraordinary was happening. The poor boy himself didn't know the significance of his role at first. He thought he was simply helping, simply being himself, without realizing that he had stumbled into a challenge that had defeated countless adults. He treated the billionaire's son like a person, not a project. He respected him, listened to him, and treated him with patience that no one had ever shown. In doing so, he became a mirror, reflecting what the son truly was beneath the anger, the mischief, and the rebellion. By the end of this first week, the impossible had shifted slightly. The billionaire's son, who had laughed at every tutor and teacher, began to look forward to seeing this boy. He tested him, yes, but he also listened. And for the first time, he felt a spark of something he had never felt before, connection, understanding, and maybe even respect. It was a small beginning, but beginnings are powerful. The stage was set for a transformation that no one could have predicted. A child from a life of hardship had entered a world of wealth and privilege, not to compete, not to impress, but to simply be himself. And in that simple act, he had begun the impossible journey of leading the most untouchable child in the country. The billionaire's son had never met anyone like the poor boy before. In the first few days, he had tried every trick in the book to test him, mocking him, ignoring him, even trying to scare him into leaving. Most people would have been intimidated or angered by such behavior, but the poor boy simply stayed calm, observing carefully, never reacting with fear or anger. That made the billionaire's son even more curious. He had grown used to people giving up, walking away, or scolding him, but this boy didn't do any of that. Their first real encounter, where things began to shift, happened in the mansion's sprawling garden. The billionaire's son had been riding his bicycle recklessly, weaving dangerously between expensive flower beds, pretending he didn't hear the boy calling after him. The boy didn't shout, didn't scold. He simply walked alongside, keeping pace, and finally said in a soft, steady voice, "Why do you ride like that?" The question was so simple, yet it stopped the son in his tracks. No one had ever asked him why before. People had tried to control his actions, punish him, or force him to follow rules, but no one had ever wanted to understand him. That one question planted a seed, just small enough to spark curiosity, just subtle enough not to feel like authority. From that moment, their encounters became a careful dance. The billionaire's son would test him, pushing boundaries, seeing if the boy would lose his temper or walk away. Sometimes he threw toys, sometimes he ignored him entirely, sometimes he tried to trick him into leaving. But the boy remained steady, responding with patience, calm reasoning, or sometimes just a silent presence. That was the most unusual thing, the boy didn't react the way anyone else would. It wasn't immediate friendship. The billionaire's son still laughed at him sometimes, mocked him, and made life difficult in ways he knew adults couldn't handle. But he also began to watch him. He noticed how the boy didn't judge him, didn't demand, and didn't react with fear. Instead, he listened, waited, and sometimes simply smiled. Slowly, the son realized that the boy was different, not trying to control him, not trying to impress him, just being there. The boy began to learn how to navigate the son's moods. When the son was angry or frustrated, he didn't argue, he gave space and approached gently. When the son was playful or curious, he engaged with enthusiasm. He began to anticipate the son's behavior, not with manipulation, but with understanding. And each day, the son began to notice, even unconsciously, that someone finally understood him. Their first real breakthrough came during a simple game of chess. The son was notoriously impatient and would often throw pieces or quit mid-game. But the poor boy didn't scold him. Instead, he quietly explained the rules again, showing patience and clarity. For the first time, the son didn't quit. He paused, listened, and even tried to follow the instructions. The boy didn't celebrate or boast, he simply kept playing. That small victory, unnoticed by anyone else, meant the world to the billionaire's son. He realized someone could be patient with him, and more importantly, someone could see his potential. Even the father noticed subtle changes. The boy was not a teacher or a coach, he was something different, something new. He wasn't trying to fix the son, he was simply connecting with him in a way no one had ever done before. And that connection, fragile but growing, was the key that might unlock the impossible challenge the father had long feared could never be solved. By the end of this first week of real interaction, the billionaire's son had begun to test boundaries differently. Instead of pushing the boy away or mocking him completely, he sometimes paused to listen. He sometimes asked questions back. He sometimes laughed genuinely at the boy's calm, clever responses. No one else had ever made him feel seen in this way, and for the first time, he was curious, not just about the world, but about the boy himself. It was a small, fragile beginning, but beginnings like this are powerful. Trust, even in its smallest form, can grow into something extraordinary. The poor boy had no authority, no wealth, and no position, yet he had achieved what countless adults could not. He had entered the impossible space of the billionaire's son's world and had, without even realizing it, begun to create a bridge where none had existed before. The real journey was only beginning. The first encounters had set the stage. The walls of defiance had been tested, and for the first time, cracks appeared. Cracks small enough to let understanding and change seep in, cracks that might one day lead to the impossible becoming real. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the billionaire's son began to change. It wasn't sudden, and it wasn't dramatic at first, but the cracks that had appeared in his walls during the first encounter started to widen. The poor boy didn't force him to listen, didn't punish him, and didn't demand obedience. Instead, he did something far more powerful. He showed patience, respect, and understanding. Every small gesture, every calm word, every moment of quiet presence mattered more than anyone could have imagined. The first real sign of progress came one afternoon when the two of them were walking through the mansion's vast library. The billionaire's son, who had always rushed past books and ignored the treasures around him, paused. Something about the boy's calm demeanor and gentle curiosity made him stop and watch. The poor boy picked up a book and began reading aloud, not to teach, not to impress, but simply to share a story. And for the first time, the son listened. He didn't just hear the words, he became absorbed in the story, noticing the emotion, the rhythm, and the characters. It was a small moment, but it marked a shift. He was beginning to trust that this boy wasn't there to judge or control him. Trust grew in even smaller, quieter ways. The billionaire's son started to open up, not with grand declarations, but with tiny admissions. I didn't like school today, or I get bored sometimes. The poor boy didn't react with criticism or surprise. He simply listened and responded in ways that showed understanding. When the son expressed frustration, he nodded calmly, letting him vent. When he showed excitement or curiosity, he encouraged it. And slowly, the son began to realize that this boy was different from everyone else he had met. He didn't have to perform or behave perfectly. He could simply be himself. Even small games and daily routines became opportunities to build trust. During a simple game of catch, the son tried to cheat, to push boundaries, or to trick the boy, just as he had done with every other adult. But instead of scolding or retaliating, the boy smiled and adjusted. He let the son test the rules, letting him feel in control, while gently guiding him toward fairness and honesty. The son began to see that he could experiment, take risks, and still be respected. For the first time, he felt safe exploring his emotions without fear of judgment or punishment. Family members noticed subtle changes, too. The son still had his moments of rebellion, but there were now glimpses of calmness, of thoughtfulness, of patience. Staff who had once dreaded his presence began to notice that he sometimes waited politely, sometimes listened before reacting, and sometimes laughed sincerely. Even his father, who had long feared that no one could reach his son, began to see a tiny spark of hope. He couldn't explain it fully, but he could see the transformation in small, meaningful ways. What made this trust building so remarkable was its authenticity. The poor boy never tried to force change. He didn't lecture, bribe, or punish. He simply existed in the son's world as someone who believed in him, someone who respected him, and someone who refused to give up. That consistency, that calm patience, worked magic where authority, wealth, and power had failed. It wasn't an easy journey, and there were setbacks, tantrums, moments of anger, days when the son withdrew, but each setback became an opportunity for the poor boy to demonstrate care and understanding, reinforcing the fragile trust between them. One day, the son did something unexpected. During a walk in the garden, he hesitated before throwing a tantrum over a broken toy. Instead of lashing out, he paused, looked at the poor boy, and said quietly, "I didn't mean to do that." It was the first time he had admitted a mistake to anyone, and it was a profound moment. The boy simply smiled, acknowledged it, and moved forward. No judgment, no punishment, just understanding. That small act, that brief moment of honesty, marked a turning point. The son realized that trust wasn't about controlling or fearing someone, it was about feeling safe to be himself, and he had never experienced that before. By the end of these early weeks, the bond between them had grown stronger. Trust, once absent, was now taking root. It wasn't complete, and there were still walls to break, but the foundation had been laid. The billionaire's son, who had seemed impossible to guide, was beginning to learn that patience, empathy, and understanding could be more powerful than wealth, rules, or authority. And the poor boy, without realizing it, had become more than just a companion, he had become a guide, a mirror, and a steady presence capable of showing the son a world beyond anger and defiance. The real work had just begun, but the impossible was already starting to feel possible. Even as trust began to form, the path forward was far from easy. The billionaire's son, though slowly opening up, was still stubborn, unpredictable, and full of defiance. Every small victory the poor boy achieved was met with new challenges. Friends, family members, and tutors watched skeptically, whispering doubts. "No one can teach him," they said. "He's too wild, too clever, too set in his ways." But the poor boy refused to be discouraged. He understood that change doesn't happen overnight, and he knew that true transformation would require patience, courage, and creativity. The obstacles weren't only behavioral, they were emotional, social, and psychological. The billionaire's son had grown up in a world where wealth and status solved most problems, and he expected people to obey or impress him. He had never encountered anyone who treated him as an equal, someone who wouldn't be swayed by his power or intimidated by his temper. The poor boy, from a life of scarcity and struggle, had learned resilience, humility, and understanding. He had faced difficulties far beyond his years, and that experience gave him a perspective that no one else could offer. It was exactly what the son needed, though neither of them fully realized it yet. One day, the billionaire's son threw a furious tantrum. He was angry over a minor disagreement during a game, and he lashed out violently, breaking a vase and shouting at the boy to leave. Most adults would have reacted with punishment, fear, or anger. The poor boy, however, remained calm. He didn't scold, he didn't run, he didn't try to argue. Instead, he waited quietly, giving the son space to express himself. When the boy finally stopped, exhausted and frustrated, the poor boy spoke gently, "I understand you're upset. Let's figure it out together." The son paused, shocked. No one had ever responded like this. No one had ever stayed calm while he was angry. No one had ever offered support instead of criticism. Slowly, he felt a strange mix of relief and respect. He realized that anger didn't have to drive people away, that mistakes didn't have to lead to punishment. For the first time, he felt that someone was truly on his side. But the challenges didn't end there. Outside pressures and expectations added weight to the journey. Family members doubted the poor boy's influence, critics scoffed at his methods, and peers questioned the son's growing respect for someone so different from himself. Every day was a test, not just of patience, but of belief. The poor boy had to prove not only that he could guide the son, but also that trust, empathy, and understanding could overcome years of defiance, privilege, and fear. Slowly, progress emerged through small, deliberate actions. The poor boy encouraged the son to face challenges rather than avoid them. If the son refused a difficult task, the boy would suggest trying together, offering guidance without judgment. If the son made a mistake, the boy would treat it as a learning opportunity rather than a failure. This approach was revolutionary for the billionaire's son. He was used to being praised for success and punished for mistakes. Now, he was learning that mistakes were natural, that patience mattered, and that guidance could come without fear. A particularly pivotal moment came during a community event in the city. The son was invited to meet children from neighborhoods far less privileged than his own. At first, he resisted, mocking the event and complaining loudly. But the poor boy encouraged him gently, showing him how to connect, how to listen, and how to participate without arrogance or judgment. By the end of the event, the son had not only participated but had begun to enjoy himself, discovering a world he had never experienced before. That day, the impossible began to feel achievable, not just for the son, but for everyone who had doubted him. Each obstacle they faced, from tantrums to skepticism, became an opportunity to strengthen their bond. The billionaire's son began to internalize lessons that no tutor, mentor, or parent had ever been able to teach. He was learning resilience, empathy, and patience, lessons that came not from rules or authority, but from connection, understanding, and example. The poor boy, through his calm presence and unwavering support, had started turning the impossible challenge into a real, tangible journey toward transformation. By the end of this stage, the son was still far from perfect, but the walls of defiance had cracked further. The poor boy had proven that obstacles, no matter how daunting, could be overcome with patience, consistency, and empathy. The impossible was no longer an abstract idea, it was a challenge they were beginning to conquer together. The true test of their bond came unexpectedly. It wasn't a game, a lesson, or a carefully planned moment, it was a crisis, sudden and unavoidable, that shook the billionaire's son to his core. One afternoon, while exploring the mansion's grounds, he ventured too close to the edge of a cliff near the estate's private garden. A misstep sent him slipping, and for a terrifying moment, it seemed as though disaster was inevitable. Panic surged through him, raw and uncontrolled. He called for help, but fear made him freeze. His usual confidence, the defiance that had carried him through countless challenges, disappeared. He was vulnerable in a way he had never been before. In that instant, the boy who had stood quietly by him in every trial, the poor boy from a life of hardship and courage, became his lifeline. Without hesitation, the poor boy acted. Calmly, deliberately, he reached out, guiding the son back to safety. He didn't shout, panic, or criticize. He simply extended a steady hand, reassuring words flowing with patience and confidence. "I've got you. Trust me. Take it slow. You can do this." Those words, simple and steady, were more powerful than any command or lesson the son had ever received. For the first time, he felt completely seen, completely supported, and completely safe in someone else's hands. Once back on solid ground, the billionaire's son collapsed, trembling with fear and relief. The poor boy didn't celebrate, didn't scold, and didn't allow the moment to become about fear or failure. He helped the son to stand upright, to breathe, and to understand what had happened. He showed, without words, that mistakes and dangers were part of life, but courage, patience, and trust could guide him through anything. That day marked the first major turning point. The billionaire's son realized, in a way he never had before, that true guidance didn't come from wealth, authority, or fear, it came from connection, understanding, and belief in another person. The poor boy had led him through a literal and emotional crisis, showing him that trust could be mutual and that he didn't have to face the world alone. From that moment on, the son began to change more noticeably. He listened when the poor boy spoke, not just hearing the words but absorbing their meaning. He began to attempt tasks he had previously refused, taking risks with guidance rather than defiance. He started to admit when he was wrong and to celebrate small successes, understanding for the first time that mistakes weren't a mark of failure but steps toward growth. This turning point extended beyond physical danger. It reshaped their entire dynamic. The billionaire's son no longer saw the poor boy as someone from a different world, he saw him as an equal, a partner in discovery, and someone who had proven through action what words alone could never achieve. The bond deepened, now rooted in shared experience, trust, and respect rather than mere curiosity or patience. The father noticed the change immediately. He had seen countless adults fail to influence his son, yet here was a boy with no power, no title, no authority, guiding his child through fear, frustration, and rebellion with ease. The father understood that this turning point was not just about survival on that cliff, it was about transformation. The impossible had begun to bend toward possibility. Even the staff and tutors who had once dismissed the son's potential began to observe subtle, lasting changes. He smiled more sincerely, engaged more thoughtfully, and showed moments of patience and self-control that were unheard of before. The mansion, once filled with tension and quiet frustration, began to feel lighter, as if the weight of impossibility was lifting from everyone who interacted with him. By the end of this defining moment, the son had begun to understand a truth that would stay with him forever. Guidance and leadership aren't about control, punishment, or authority, they are about connection, empathy, and trust. The poor boy, without ever seeking recognition, had unlocked the first real key to the son's transformation. The turning point wasn't just an event, it was a revelation. A single act of courage, patience, and understanding had rewritten the rules of what was possible. From that day onward, the journey toward the impossible no longer seemed impossible. The son had begun to trust, to grow, and to believe, not only in the boy who guided him, but also in himself. After the turning point, the billionaire's son began to change in ways no one could have imagined. The fear and defiance that had defined him for years were slowly replaced with curiosity, patience, and a sense of responsibility. It didn't happen all at once, transformation is never instant, but each day brought small victories that, over time, added up to something extraordinary. The poor boy had become more than a guide, he was a mirror reflecting the potential the son had hidden behind anger and privilege. The change started with the simplest acts. The son began to listen attentively when someone spoke, not just to respond, but to understand. He started completing tasks he would have once refused outright, approaching them with thoughtfulness instead of rebellion. He learned to control his temper, not because he was forced to, but because he now understood the value of patience and trust. Even the staff and tutors noticed the difference. The boy who had been impossible to lead was now willing to learn, willing to try, and willing to make mistakes without fear of judgment. The father watched this transformation with amazement. The son who had once defied every rule and resisted every mentor was now engaging, curious, and even empathetic. He saw his child talking calmly with the poor boy, laughing together, and sharing ideas without the usual power struggle. It was a complete reversal from the chaos that had filled their home for years. The father began to understand that true guidance doesn't come from money, authority, or punishment, it comes from connection, understanding, and trust. The son's transformation extended beyond behavior, it touched his heart. He began to notice the struggles of others, showing kindness to those he had once ignored or dismissed. He began to take responsibility for his actions, apologizing when he was wrong, and celebrating the successes of others without jealousy. He discovered that empathy was not a weakness, but a strength, and that helping others could bring more satisfaction than asserting power ever had. The lessons he learned from the poor boy went far beyond schoolwork or manners, they were life lessons that would shape his character forever. One afternoon, the two boys were working together on a small project, building a simple model of a bridge. At first, the billionaire's son struggled, frustrated by failure. But the poor boy stayed calm, offering guidance and encouragement without judgment. Slowly, the son began to focus, listen, and try again. When the bridge finally stood, he didn't just smile, he beamed with pride, not in defiance, but in genuine accomplishment. That day, the son realized that hard work, patience, and collaboration could create results far more meaningful than anything he had achieved through rebellion or stubbornness. Their friendship grew stronger with each passing day. The billionaire's son no longer saw the poor boy as someone from a different world, he saw him as a partner, a friend, and a mentor. He began seeking advice, listening carefully, and reflecting on lessons he had once ignored. The mansion, which had felt tense and controlled by fear, now seemed filled with laughter, learning, and hope. The staff noticed the difference, the father noticed the difference, and most importantly, the son himself noticed the difference. He was no longer defined by defiance, he was defined by growth, understanding, and possibility. What made this transformation remarkable was its depth. It wasn't superficial obedience or temporary compliance. It was a fundamental shift in mindset and character. The son had learned to value empathy over power, patience over impatience, and connection over control. He had begun to see that true greatness comes not from wealth or status, but from courage, compassion, and understanding. And the poor boy, without ever demanding recognition, had guided him there, showing that influence and leadership can come from anyone, regardless of background or privilege. By the end of this stage, the billionaire's son had become someone unrecognizable from the child he had been. He was thoughtful, confident, and caring, capable of facing challenges without anger and of learning from mistakes instead of fearing them. His journey from defiance to transformation proved that even the most impossible challenges could be overcome with patience, understanding, and trust. And through it all, the poor boy remained by his side, not as a servant or subordinate, but as a true friend, mentor, and guiding light. The impossible had been transformed into reality. The son who no one could lead had been led, not through force, punishment, or fear, but through understanding, empathy, and connection. Their story became a testament to the power of mentorship, resilience, and the extraordinary potential that lies within unexpected friendships. The transformation of the billionaire's son did not end with personal growth, it rippled outward, touching everyone around him. What had begun as an impossible challenge had evolved into a story of hope, perseverance, and the extraordinary power of human connection. The mansion that had once been filled with tension, frustration, and chaos now felt alive with energy, laughter, and purpose. The change was visible to all, yet its most profound impact was invisible, the way the son carried himself, thought, and cared for others. The poor boy, who had once been a stranger from a world of hardship, had not only guided the billionaire's son but had become a bridge between two very different lives. He showed that influence is not about wealth, power, or status, but about empathy, understanding, and courage. Through his patient guidance, he had taught lessons that money could not buy, authority could not enforce, and rules could not dictate. And the son, once rebellious and untouchable, had absorbed those lessons, becoming a young man who could inspire, lead, and care in ways no one had ever expected. Word of their story spread quietly at first. Staff, neighbors, and friends began to speak of the boy who had accomplished what no one else could. Then it reached the father, whose pride was tempered with humility. He realized that his son's growth was not due to his wealth or authority, but to the presence of a young boy from a completely different life, someone who had shown him patience, understanding, and unwavering belief. The father understood a lesson that no fortune could teach: true transformation comes from connection, not control. Beyond the walls of the mansion, the impact began to extend further. The billionaire's son, now confident and empathetic, began to interact with his peers differently. He treated others with respect, encouraged those struggling, and used his influence to help rather than dominate. He participated in charitable work, listened to those from different backgrounds, and became a role model for younger children who once thought they could never overcome obstacles. He was proof that even those born with privilege could learn humility, empathy, and resilience from those with the least, not the most. The poor boy's own life was changed as well. What had started as a small act of guidance turned into a profound journey of purpose. He had learned that his experiences, struggles, and perspective could create impact far beyond what he had imagined. His courage and patience had rewritten the story of a child many had considered impossible, and in doing so, he had discovered his own potential to inspire, teach, and transform lives. Together, they had created a legacy neither could have achieved alone. One of the most remarkable aspects of their story was its ripple effect. Friends, family, and even strangers who heard about the transformation began to question what they thought was impossible. Could understanding change a hardened heart? Could empathy reshape behavior that seemed unchangeable? Could two people from completely different worlds build a bond that challenged every expectation? The answer, proven by these two boys, was yes. And that answer inspired others to believe in the power of connection, courage, and patience in their own lives. In time, the billionaire's son began to mentor others, guided by the lessons he had learned. He shared what the poor boy had taught him, that leadership is not about control, but about listening, that influence is not about fear, but about trust, and that the impossible can become possible when someone believes in you without judgment. Their story became more than a personal transformation, it became a blueprint for how lives could be changed, how bridges could be built, and how the impossible could be achieved in the most unexpected ways. The mansion, once a place of frustration and unreachability, had become a home of learning, compassion, and possibility. The billionaire's son, transformed by the patient guidance of a boy from a life of struggle, had grown into someone capable of inspiring others, not through wealth or authority, but through empathy and courage. And the poor boy, who had dared to enter a world so different from his own, had left a mark that would last forever, not just on one child, but on the countless lives that were touched by their story. In the end, the impossible was no longer impossible. Two boys, from worlds apart, had shown that patience, trust, and courage could rewrite destinies. Their story became a testament to the power of mentorship, the value of empathy, and the extraordinary potential that lies within the human spirit. The legacy they created was not measured in wealth or titles, but in the lives they transformed, the hearts they inspired, and the hope they gave to a world that so often believes some challenges are too great to overcome.